For decades, the school books taught us Indus, Mesopotamia, and Egypt rose around roughly the same ancient horizon. But what if the story is farther back, and the roots of the Indus world began millennia before Egypt's first dynasties? New radiocarbon work at the site called Bhirrana in Haryana suggests that human activity there as early as roughly 6000 BCE, and that claim, if carefully explained, pushes the deep roots of South Asian civilization into a very different line. Not to say cities existed then, but that the cultural and agricultural foundation took shape far earlier than many people realize. The key point is distinction between roots and urban civilization. Archaeologists use words like early settlement or pre-Harappan to describe these layers, not mature Harappan cities. Radiocarbon and other dating methods at Bhirrana indicate very early occupation layers and Hakraware pottery context, which means long-term human presence and cultural continuity in Jagar-Hakra corridor, not in the Mohenjo-daro or Harappa, suddenly existed 8000 years ago. That nuance will be important to keep your views informed and to avoid the overclaiming. Imagine the map, northwestern India and eastern Pakistan, where seasonal rivers like Jagar once flowed more strongly, a landscape that allowed the farming communities to take root. The Bhirrana site sits in modern Haryana, in that Jagar basin, and it is one of the several sites whose lower layers return the radiocarbon ages in the early to mid-Holocene period, making the region central to any argument about the deep antiquity for the Indus cultural complex. Excavators recovered charcoal, pottery, and other material from the successive layers. Radiocarbon C14 and some OSL results indicate very early dates at the lowest levels. Calibrated ages that place human activity in the 7th and the 6th millennium BC range in some samples, but not every sample gives the same data, and only a few key samples push back to the deep horizon. Multiple labs and cross-checks matter for the confidence. Conventional Harappan periodization separates the early Harappan around 3300 BC and mature Harappan urban phase 2600 to 1900 BC. The Bhirrana results, if accepted broadly, suggest an earlier sequence of the villages and farming communities that gradually evolved over millennia into the urban Harappan tradition, a much longer development arc rather than a sudden appearance of the cities. It is tempting to say older than Egypt, because Egypt's dynastic unification around 3100 BC is familiar anchor. But remember, Egypt had long pre-dynastic cultures too. The safe, compelling phrasing is some evidence now suggests Indus roots may extend deeper into the Holocene than we assumed, making parts of the Indus cultural story as ancient or older in some respects than the timeline commonly associated with the early pharaohic Egypt. This contrast creates curiosity while staying honest. Not all the archaeologists accept the interpretation that these early layers represent continuous Indus cultural trajectory. Critics point out sample size, stratigraphic mixing, lab calibration issues, and the need to replicate the dates across more sites. The Archaeological Survey of India and the independent researchers have both published on the region, but scholarly consensus requires broader peer-reviewed replication. If a long development phase is accepted, history shifts from the sudden urban emergence to a story of millennia-long innovation, early agriculture, local craft production, river management, and long-distance contacts which eventually feed the first cities. This gives us a new narrative. People slowly building complex social structures over thousands of years, not overnight leaps. Many media reports link Jagar-Hakra to the Vedic Saraswati. Geologic and provenance studies shows the Jagar had significant flows in the early Holocene and possibly glacial sources early on. But the identification with the Vedic river remains debated among the geologists and the historians. Replicated radiocarbon or OSL data from the multiple independent labs cleared the stratigraphic sequences across the neighboring sites. Ancient DNA or botanical data showing the continuous agriculture, and more published peer-reviewed synthesis papers connecting the dots would push this from the intriguing claim to accept the revision. Headlines that say Indus is 8000 years old are click-worthy but imprecise. The honest takeaway and the one you should share is that the roots of Indus cultural tradition may go back to the early Holocene, adding the depth to the story of South Asian prehistory without collapsing centuries of careful archaeological periodization into a single date. Encourage curiosity, not certainty. If a new data continues to appear, this could be one of those rare moments when a widely taught timeline gets meaningfully revised. And that matters not just to specialists, but to how millions understand the past. If you found this illuminating, please subscribe.